Last Honor, a Warhammer 40K Legunus Legends short story by Benjamin Miller. As his team secured the area, Thrakis stood over his fallen brother's body. "Brother Lorshka," he whispered. Deep claw marks over the lower breastplate spoke of early attempts on the Astartes' life in the campaign, marks that had already long been lifted from the armor of his comrades. Kneeling over it, he examined the helmet, the left side of which was a mess of melted ceramite and long, dried blood. He gently used the ancient rites Tekmarine Gavran had taught him to undo the sealing clasp keeping the helmet in place, and with a barely audible hiss it unsealed. It took some tugging to tear it away from the left side, but it finally came off, and much to his surprise, Thrakis found that Brother Slorshka's flesh had not yet decayed, despite the many months his armor had lain on this planet. Though it was clear he was dead, Thrakis took his vitals despite the obvious fact, to be sure, but found no pulse. To further verify this, and the armor's condition, he removed a data slate from a pouch on his back, and pulled a long mechandrite from it, its silvery length playing in the sunlight across the scene. He plugged it into an outlet next to the mess on the left side of the brother's face. Data quickly began to pull up on the screen, and Thrakis soon did verify the Astartes was actually dead. He felt no disappointment, for he had not expected to find Brother Lorshka alive. He had merely hoped, and he never allowed hope and expectation to intertwine. That was the first step on the road to despair. He quickly found the source of what had killed the venerable battle brother, though, in truth, it had been far from any one thing. He wound back through the record to just before the massed injuries had occurred. Lorshka had been advancing with his brothers through the dense foliage, rearmost in his squad. He'd been blasting back the agitated, mutated creatures with the mass-reactive rounds from his Stormbolter, keeping the flanks and rear clear so that his squad could advance on the compound that the scouts had tagged to be now less than 1 kilometer ahead of them. His squad had just been advancing through a particularly dense line of trees, the mutant creatures almost literally springing from the woodwork, some ape-like with over-bulging muscles and wide, massive mouths, others with multi-thin, spindly legs that carried them forward like scurrying spiders, with almost human torsos attached like some deviation of the ancient centaurs of old Earth. All died. Whether to bolt, blade, or fist, they died, their gore painting the jungle. In the distance, 2 kilometers to the east, the tactical and devastator squads were making up ground quickly, taking advantage of the mass numbers Lorshka's squad was drawing off their position. Just as Brother Lorshka himself was drawing up to the tree line, something struck him from the rear, punching through his venerable Terminator armor, tearing straight through ceramite and adamantium. It lanced into his body, in the middle of the spinal column and into the internal organs. Hemorrhaging, internal and external bleeding, the damaged Laraman organ was struggling to produce enough Laraman cells to fully clot all these wounds. Secondary heart damaged, 1 lung destroyed, all abdominal organs failing to respond, nervous system being overwhelmed with sensory overload from the pain. Yet the armor had dutifully recorded Lorshka had simply fallen to his knees and continued to fight, locking his armor's knee and hip joints to keep him upright, so he could continue to cover his team through the dense foliage of the forest, with bursts from his Stormbolter as they rushed the enemy force of mutants, which were now being supported by Traitor and Xenos elements. He continued to fight like this for 21 minutes, 16 seconds before a second burst from whatever weapon had first felled him struck him again in the back, knocking him flat on his face and doing even greater damage to his vital organs, pulverizing most of his primary heart, which haphazardly somehow continued to beat, though whether it was doing its function whatsoever was doubtful, leaving his already damaged second heart to try and keep his blood pumping, even as his also damaged Laraman organ tried to release the necessary Laraman cells to clot all this new damage. However, this time it was proving to be too much, as blood continued to flow out of him steadily. At this point, Lorshka's Susan membrane attempted to induce him into a state of suspended animation. However, Lorshka overrode it, and with excruciating agony that threatened to overload even his superhuman nervous system and drive him into unconsciousness, pushed himself over onto his superheated back. The picture mounted in Lorshka's helmet now showed a figure standing over him, aiming a Xenos weapon of unknown design. A trader marine smiling softly, it aimed the weapon down at him to deliver the last deadly blow, but it never got the chance. Lorshka's Stormbolter rose in less time it took for his hearts to beat their final discordant time, and it was confirmed that in the very moment of his death he delivered a fusillade of bolter rounds directly into the unprotected face of the trader marine, slaying the foul creature before he could cause any more harm to Legionus. Finishing downloading the rest of the logs and data stored in the armor, Thrakus removed the mechondrite and then resealed the armor with the damaged helmet. Turning to Vishorka, he issued orders. We disassemble the armor as instructed, but his body has been preserved. His wounds were still superheated when he fell, and upon contact with the ground must have become fused with it, preserving him. His gene seed may yet be recoverable. Harvest it, and Apothecary Akrash shall inspect it upon our return, to see if it is viable for continued use in the chapter. We use Zethul's melt-a-gun to leave no trace of his remains upon leaving. Vishorka nodded and turned from sentry duty to the body, his skill with disassembling Terminator armor being his reason for donning scout armor and accompanying them on this mission, despite his status as a veteran assault marine in the 3rd Company. 2 other scouts, Lesva and Boral, turned to help him whenever he would need it. Thrakus turned to monitoring the perimeter, making sure no threats dare endanger them, while they gave what last honor they could to one of Legionus' greatest Adeptus Astartes.